Ethan Ross had one last wish. "I just want to see Rocco one more time," he whispered, his voice trembling with a rawness that echoed across the cold, sterile cell. The words escaped him like a prayer, as if the simple act of asking could somehow turn back the hands of time. The guard standing at the door barely acknowledged him, glancing at the request with disinterest. It was another day in the lifeless routine of prison, another prisoner asking for something that couldn't be granted. But this wasn't just any request. It was the last one, the final plea of a man who had already made peace with his fate. A soft knock on the door interrupted the silence, and a moment later, Warden Celeste Grant entered, her footsteps echoing off the concrete floor. She was a woman who had seen it all. Nothing fazed her. Her face was the picture of professionalism, a mask that betrayed no emotion, yet her eyes softened slightly when they met Ethan's. "Rocco?" she asked, her voice cautious, unsure of how to respond. "Ethan, we don't do that here. Animals on prison grounds. That's not something we handle." Ethan's heart sank, but he steadied himself, desperation giving him strength. "Please, Warden. Rocco is with Harper Lane, my fiancée. She's kept him all these years. I need to see him. Just once more." His words faltered, the weight of his request heavy in the air. His voice cracked, revealing the agony of 5 years spent in this place. 5 years apart from the one creature that had loved him unconditionally. He could almost feel Rocco's warm presence beside him, the loyal dog that had been his companion through the darkest days of his life. Warden Grant studied him silently, her gaze narrowing as she weighed the request. Ethan saw the hesitation in her eyes. This was no ordinary favor to ask, but the last shred of hope he clung to. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she sighed, her expression softening. "I'll see what I can do," she muttered, turning on her heel and walking away. Ethan closed his eyes, the faintest glimmer of hope stirring in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, he could see his dog again before it was too late. Harper Lane sat at the small kitchen table in her quiet apartment, the muted sounds of the television in the background barely reaching her ears. She had tried to focus on the mundane, tried to distract herself with the daily routine, but it was impossible to escape the storm of emotions swirling inside her. The news of Ethan's impending execution had plastered every screen and every newspaper, and now, with each passing hour, it felt like time was slipping through her fingers like sand. Her hands trembled as she sipped her coffee, staring at Rocco, who lay at her feet. The German Shepherd was aging, his once shiny coat now faded, his movements slower with each passing day. Yet in his eyes there remained a flicker of the same loyalty and love that had sustained her through the darkest days. Rocco had been Ethan's dog long before he had become hers, and every moment with him was a bittersweet reminder of the life they had lost. The phone rang, cutting through the silence of the room. Harper jumped, her heart racing as she grabbed the receiver, her fingers shaking. "Ms. Lane?" The voice on the other end was calm, professional. "This is Warden Celeste Grant. I'm calling to inform you that Ethan Ross has made a request. He wants to see Rocco one last time before his execution." Harper's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this. The request sounded almost impossible, yet there it was, a lifeline in the form of a final wish. "Is that something? Can I bring him to the prison?" Harper's voice was barely above a whisper, her mind racing with the logistics of it all. How could she make this happen in time? "We've received conditional approval, but you'll need to bring Rocco here within 90 minutes, the warden continued. "This is a one-time exception. Ms. Lane, I understand the urgency." Harper's heart thundered in her chest. The idea of seeing Ethan again, of fulfilling his last wish, filled her with equal parts hope and dread. She looked down at Rocco, who had lifted his head, sensing the shift in the air. He stared at her, his deep brown eyes full of understanding, as though he too knew the weight of what was about to unfold. "I'll be there," Harper replied, her voice trembling. She hung up the phone, her hands still shaking. There was no time to lose. Harper's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she drove, her knuckles white from the tension. The streets of the city blurred past her, a mix of flashing lights and distant noise. Rocco sat in the back seat, his head resting against the window, his eyes fixed on the world outside. He was excited, his tail occasionally wagging, but there was an unmistakable sense of unease in his posture. Harper could feel it too. This wasn't just another trip. It was the culmination of a journey that had started long before this day, a journey marked by love, loss, and an unbreakable bond. She had to make it. She had to get to the prison in time. As the miles stretched on, Harper's mind wandered back to the day Ethan had been taken away, the day everything had changed. Ethan had been convicted of a crime he swore he didn't commit, and despite the years that had passed, despite all the evidence and the protests of those who knew him, he had never been able to clear his name. The courts had closed their doors on him, and now, as the clock ticked down on his life, Harper was left with nothing but the hope that she could give him this one final moment of peace. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the road. It would be close, but Harper refused to give up. She pushed the accelerator harder, praying for a miracle. Every passing minute felt like an eternity. In the back seat, Rocco lifted his head, his ears perked. He could sense the urgency in the air, the tension in his owner's voice and movements. He let out a low whine, as if to reassure her that he was with her, that they were in this together. The prison loomed ahead, its stark, imposing walls casting a shadow over the landscape. Harper's heart tightened in her chest as she pulled up to the entrance, the towering gates opening with a mechanical grind. She wasn't sure what she expected, but nothing about this felt real. As she parked and got out, the guard directed her to the entrance. Rocco walked beside her, his steps slow but steady. Harper could barely breathe as she walked down the corridor, each step taking her closer to the man she loved and the dog that had shared so much with them both. The cold concrete walls of the prison felt oppressive. Each step Harper took echoed in the silence, magnifying the weight of the moment. Rocco, his usual confident gait subdued, trotted beside her, sensing the gravity of the situation. It was almost as if he understood the significance of what was about to happen, as if he could feel the rush of emotion that flooded Harper's heart. They reached the small visitation room, a sterile, unwelcoming space with flickering, fluorescent lights overhead. The guard motioned for them to wait, and Harper's stomach tightened. Her hands were clammy, her breath shallow as she stood there, trying to steady herself. This moment, this final meeting, felt surreal. How could she have imagined that she would walk into this place, carrying Rocco in tow, to see Ethan for the last time? The door at the far end of the room creaked open, and Ethan appeared, his face gaunt, his movements slow, as though the weight of his impending execution was already taking its toll. The moment their eyes met, everything else faded away. It was as if time stood still. Rocco, who had been calm up until this point, suddenly perked up, his ears erect. His tail began to wag frantically as he bounded forward, unable to contain his excitement. Ethan dropped to his knees, his face lighting up with pure joy at the sight of his beloved dog. Rocco leapt into his arms, licking his face in frantic joy, as if to say, "I'm here! I'm here!" Harper stood at the doorway, her heart breaking at the sight. She could hardly hold back the tears as she watched the reunion unfold. Rocco, once a symbol of the life they had lost, was now the bridge to their past, to everything they had once been. "Hey, buddy," Ethan whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he cradled Rocco in his arms. "I missed you so much." Harper's voice faltered as she spoke. "I tried, Ethan. I begged them to look again. I begged for another chance." Ethan shook his head gently, his hand resting on Rocco's back. "You did more than anyone could, but there was no time left." The warden cleared her throat, a reminder of the ticking clock. "You have 15 minutes, Mr. Ross," she said softly. "After that, the chaplain will come for you." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. But for now, Ethan had his dog. For now, they had this moment, this bittersweet gift of time. Detective Lucas Hayes sat alone in his cramped office, his mind a tangled mess of frustration and regret. The case of Ethan Ross had haunted him for years, ever since that fateful night when everything had spiraled out of control. He had been the one to close the file, convinced beyond doubt that Ethan was guilty of Brandon Lockhart's murder. But now, as the days ticked down to Ethan's execution, doubt gnawed at him like an insistent pest. Something didn't sit right. The inconsistencies, the overlooked evidence, the missing pieces, it all came flooding back. It wasn't just a case anymore. It was a matter of justice, or perhaps a lack thereof. Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that they had all been wrong, that they had been too eager to close the case and too quick to condemn an innocent man. He glanced at the pile of files on his desk, each one a reminder of the countless cases he had solved over the years. Yet this one, Ethan Ross, seemed to cling to him in a way no other case ever had. The weight of the mistakes hung heavy on his shoulders. How had they not seen it sooner? How had they let Ethan's life slip away in the shadows of false evidence? The hours had passed quickly, and now with only a few hours remaining before the execution, Lucas knew he had to act. He picked up the phone and dialed the number of his old contact, someone who specialized in retrieving digital evidence. There had to be something they had missed all those years ago. Maybe this time they could prove Ethan's innocence. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. "Hayes!" The voice on the other end sounded guarded. "What is it?" "I need your help," Lucas said, his voice tight with urgency. "I need you to retrieve the phone records from the night of Brandon Lockhart's murder. I think there's something we missed." The silence stretched between them before the voice responded, "All right, I'll see what I can do." Lucas hung up, a sliver of hope piercing the fog of regret that had clouded his thoughts. Time was running out, but perhaps, just perhaps, there was a chance to right a wrong, right? The prison walls seemed to close in on Ethan as he sat in his final holding cell, waiting. The faint smell of antiseptic and cold metal filled the air, mixing with the distant murmurs of guards and the muffled sounds of other prisoners. It had been a long, dark journey from the moment he had been convicted of Brandon Lockhart's murder. The world outside had moved on, but he had remained trapped in the cage of his conviction, a man condemned by a crime he did not commit. The small plastic tray in front of him sat untouched. His final meal, a cheeseburger with extra pickles, seemed like a cruel joke. How could he eat when his heart was heavy with regret, knowing that his life was slipping away with each passing minute? Ethan stared at the gray walls of his cell, his mind a blur of memories, memories of his life before the trial, before the accusation, before everything had crumbled. He thought of Harper, his one true love, and of Rocco, the dog who had stood by him through it all. He thought of the small moments of peace they had shared, moments that now seemed like fragments of a life that would never be his again. He had said goodbye to Harper, to Rocco, and to the world outside, but it wasn't enough. There were so many things left unsaid, so many wrongs left unrighted. And now, as the clock ticked down to 9 a.m., Ethan knew there was no way out. But then, in a twist of fate, something unexpected happened. The door to his cell creaked open, and the warden stepped inside, her expression unreadable. Behind her, Harper stood, her face pale with anxiety, but there was something else in her eyes, a flicker of hope. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Was this a dream? Was this his last wish finally being granted? Then he saw Rocco. The dog, his loyal companion, stood at Harper's side, his ears perked up as he sniffed the air. Ethan couldn't contain the rush of emotion that flooded over him. Rocco was here. He had made it. And somehow, so had he. The moment Rocco's paws hit the cold tile floor of the visitation room, his entire body seemed to spring to life. His tail wagged furiously, a mix of joy and relief that only a dog could express so unreservedly. It was as if he knew, as if he understood the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a visit, it was a reunion, one that neither Ethan nor Harper could have anticipated. Ethan, his face etched with years of hardship and pain, dropped to his knees, his hands reaching out instinctively toward his dog. Rocco didn't hesitate. With a burst of energy, he bounded toward Ethan, his nails clicking loudly against the tile floor as he jumped into his arms. The two were reunited in a rush of emotion, a bond forged through years of loyalty and love. Ethan held Rocco close, his face pressed into the dog's fur as tears welled up in his eyes. "Hey, buddy," he whispered hoarsely, his voice thick with emotion. "I missed you so much." Harper stood a few feet away, her heart breaking as she watched the reunion unfold. She had begged for this moment, fought tooth and nail for this one final chance for Ethan to be with his dog. And now as she watched the two of them together again, it felt like all the pain and the loss of the past 5 years were worth it. Rocco licked Ethan's face, his tail wagging wildly as he showered his owner with affection. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated love, but it was also a moment tinged with the bitter knowledge that time was running out. The clock was ticking. The warden cleared her throat, breaking the silence. "You have 15 minutes, Mr. Ross," she said gently, her voice soft but firm. "After that, the chaplain will come for you." Ethan nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He didn't want to think about the time limit. He didn't want to think about the reality of what was coming next. For now, all he could do was hold on to this moment, this precious moment of reunion with the dog who had been his constant through it all. The clock ticked loudly in the silent room, each second echoing in Ethan's ears as he held Rocco close. The cold walls of the prison seemed to close in, reminding him that time was slipping away faster than he could hold on to this moment. His hands trembled as he stroked Rocco's fur, the familiar feeling grounding him in a reality he didn't want to let go of. Harper stood nearby, her heart aching as she watched the reunion unfold. She had fought so hard to get here, to give Ethan this final chance to say goodbye to his loyal companion, to the dog who had been his only constant in this nightmare. Her own tears fell silently, unsure of whether they were for the years lost or the sliver of hope that now seemed to have faded with every passing second. The warden, standing quietly by the door, cleared her throat. "You have 5 minutes left," she said, her tone gentle yet firm. She had seen countless final moments in this place, but something about Ethan's quiet grief, the raw emotion in his eyes as he held Rocco, stirred something in her. She had made sure to grant him this request despite the rules, but even she couldn't ignore the injustice that hung over this entire situation. Ethan didn't respond. Words weren't enough anymore. He had spent so many years fighting, so many nights alone in his cell, but now all that mattered was the simple presence of Rocco by his side. There were no grand gestures, no promises, just this moment of peace. Outside the room, Detective Lucas Hayes was still fighting, still hoping. He had uncovered the evidence that could free Ethan, phone records, testimony, and a trail that led to a man who had framed him for a murder he didn't commit. But would it be enough? Would the governor listen in time? Harper held her breath, praying for a miracle. It was too late to undo the past, but maybe, just maybe, they could save him now. The door to the visitation room opened again, and this time it wasn't just the warden. A figure stood in the doorway, Lucas Hayes. His face was drawn, his eyes tired, but there was a glimmer of hope in them. He held out a file, his hands shaking slightly as he spoke. "The governor has postponed the execution for 48 hours. They're going to review the new evidence." For the first time in years, Ethan's heart leapt. Hope, something he thought he had lost forever, flared to life again. He looked at Rocco, who wagged his tail, sensing the change. Harper stepped forward, tears streaming down her face as she wrapped her arms around Ethan, holding him tight. "You're not going anywhere," she whispered, her voice breaking. As the minutes passed, the finality of the situation began to sink in. The clock was still ticking, but for now it was a countdown to a second chance. A chance to right the wrongs, to uncover the truth, and to rebuild a life that had been stolen from him. The battle wasn't over yet, but it was far from lost. With Rocco by his side and the possibility of freedom within reach, Ethan knew that the fight was just beginning, and this time he wasn't going to face it alone.